Today's guests are Greg Panichello, the State Director of the Small Business Development Center in Topeka. He joins us from Topeka, and Lisa Brumbaugh, the Regional Director for the SBDC, joins us from Emporia State in Emporia. So Greg, with that, I'll let you start your presentation, and you should be able to see Greg's PowerPoint, which he's graciously agreed to share with you afterwards. I'll share it out. You are all muted for the quality of the call, but if you at any time you have questions, you can unmute yourself or put a question in the chat box, and I'll be monitoring that if you don't have a microphone. So Greg and Lisa, take it away.
I got to say, Nancy, I'm going to have to ask you to moderate my online meetings. You do so well.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me and Lisa, of course, join us. And we want to spend a bit of time talking about two services the SBDC has been offering now for about 3 or 4 years. One is succession and exit planning, two sides of the same kind of equation, and valuation services. In case you're not aware, SBDC is across the state, and we have centers in 16 locations. That'll happen. We've got 2 more opening shortly, or reopening. So I'm kind of excited that we've got some really cool products to offer and that are very impactful, especially for rural Kansas. Lisa, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. As Nancy said, I'm Lisa Brumbaugh, and I'm the Regional Director here for the SBDC, located in Emporia State University. And been here for a long time, and we're really excited to have certifications now and more ability to help businesses exit and do it more successfully, we hope.
Oh my goodness, oh, there we go. So I'd like to just start, and I'm just going to go through these slides fairly quickly. So don't worry, I'm not going to bore the death out of you through a PowerPoint sleep session. The first part of our discussion today will be about succession and exit planning, and you're welcome to either ask during the process or ask at the end if you have questions. Succession and exit planning are actually the same thing. All depends on the way you want to look at it. And what we've done over the last 4 years is we've got 4 people around the state that are actually certified to do this, nationally certified. We found that, and in our strategic planning process, we identified that one of the most important things that we could do to help communities was help businesses transition ownership, whether it be generational or selling a business or buying a business. So that's the reason we did this. And Lisa, don't hesitate to chime in anywhere. There's really about 6 major components to a exit planning process. And it really starts with personal issues, like everything. There's financial issues, tax issues, value creation, which that I think is probably the most important thing we do with this, business operational issues, and legal issues. And so if you think about what happens when you transition in ownership, where you transition to another generation and you keep ownership, however you want to do that, there's a lot of questions to ask, and our folks have been certified to do this. A successful exit strategy has 3 key legs. One is to maximize the value of the business in the transition. The second is to ensure personally and financially that you're prepared. And finally, to ensure you've planned for the 3rd act of your life, assuming you're on the way out of the business instead of the way in, so that you don't, when you leave, you don't regret it, or anymore than you have to regret it. We do see the succession and exit planning process as a continuous process with some initial steps to establish goals, assess whether or not you're ready. But then it's an ongoing, and we think quarterly cycle, where you're constantly evaluating an informal valuation of your business and an assessment of the business, planned alignment of personal, financial, and business goals, identifying gaps and having action plans to fill those gaps. There are basically 2 ways to do a transition plan. One is an internal where internal one where you have a family member, a management buyout, you have some existing partner buy out another partner, or you sell to employees. And ESOPs is a great way to accomplish that. Externally, you can sell to a third party. You can recapitalize the business and sell it. You can do an IPO, or you can do an orderly or maybe not so orderly liquidation. How long does it take? Well, it can take a long time, or it can be very quick. It's all about, but it's probably never going to be very fast. So you can plan on preparation for the exit plan to take any place from 6 months to a year. You can plan on the business value and completing tax planning to take up to a year. You can complete the transaction once it's done, so in about a year, and then finally posting the transaction, getting through the process and finishing. You can expect it to years. So the total time is someplace between 3 and 5 years. And that's the average. Obviously, it can happen much, much quicker, or it can take much longer, just depending on what people need in their lives.
Let me interject here. And I think a lot of that timeline has to do with how ready, as you already mentioned, owner readiness. How ready are they to sell? And how close are they to the value they need out of that company? So, if they have to work on value enhancement before they're really ready to sell, that obviously is going to lengthen the process quite a bit.
Yeah, and one thing too is the kind of business that you're talking about can make all the difference in the world. Many of Kansas sole proprietors are one-up person doing all the work, doing the business. They're in business, but they're the one that does it. And in effect, in a lot of ways, those transitions are about finding somebody to replace them. And so that may or may not work smoothly and easily. So it's all about finding the right opportunity, as you would expect. Thank you, Lisa. There's some questions that I think a lot of people would like to know the answers to. And do you know your transaction options? Well, talking to our folks is one way to start thinking about your transaction options. Most people don't know, and until they do, it's hard to really deal with what to do and how to find your way through the process of accomplishing that. We have a formal transition team. That's one of the things that our folks really do believe in is you're going to need a transition team, which is going to include, as an example, a lawyer, a tax person, and hopefully your SBDC advisor. So, when do you plan to do the transition? If you decide one day that you're just done, that's not a good transition planning process. But being prepared is really what it's about. And then what's the timeline? So more and more of the same thing. The longer you allow to plan and do it, the better the transition process is likely to go.
One thing I'd add right here, Greg, is that's from the Exit Planning Institute survey, and they typically work with larger businesses than we do most of the time. So those businesses that probably answered those questions would range in sales from 5 to 100 million commonly, and so those are your larger end of a small business or your mid-market type businesses. And so when you get into smaller businesses like we often work with and work with most of the time, I think you'll find more no answers to a lot of those questions that you just had up there.
Excellent point. Excellent point. I'm not going to read you this slide, but basically there's 4 areas that we help with, and that's advising on the exit planning process, business valuation, which we'll talk about more later, the value acceleration process, which is really a key thing. If you think about it, you've got a business, the value of that business is a function of how well it's doing. So in the process of preparing to sell it, it probably makes a lot of sense to make its value higher by increasing sales, reducing operating costs, really managing the process. And then finally, helping with the transition itself. In Kansas, the team is including our region director, Carl Klein, here in Topeka, Tom Byler in Pittsburgh, Lisa Brumbaugh in Emporia, and Jack Harwell out of Overland Park. I expect that when our new director, either she or one of the two people that do advising for her in the Southwest Kansas will participate and get certified to do these services. So we have a good solid representation out in Western Kansas. That's our plan for right now. So before I jump on to valuation, did anybody have any questions they want to ask?
And if you do, you'll have to unmute your speaker or write it in the chat box.
Hearing none, let's move on. So the other service I was asked to talk about today, and I'm excited to tell about, is valuation services. And if you think about valuation services, there are millions of books on how to value your business. There's process coming out of your ears to come up with a value. There's people that'll tell you they can do it, and they can do it fast, they can do it slow, they can charge you an incredibly large amount of money, or they can charge you nothing, and how do you know what the heck you're doing? So one of the things that we felt as part of exit planning was a critical capacity to be able to do valuations as well. And the valuations, from our point of view, we don't do them for divorces, and we don't do them for many of the things that people would want a valuation for personal transactions. We do them as relates to small business development center services, which means we're trying to help grow small businesses or make them sustainable. So not that we won't do them, but our preference is to focus on small business development, not on dealing with divorces. But it is what it is. There are 3 keys to a successful transition in ownership of a business. And this is where valuation comes in. Knowing how much money you need to retire in the manner you wish. How much money do you got to get out of it? And can you? And if you can't, what do you have to do about it? So there's all kinds of ways to look at that, but we're focusing now on the valuation side. Knowing what your business is worth will help you be able to address those questions, and then understanding what your third act is, what you're going to do next, is as important as not. So that's transition. And as you think about how that fits, there's common elements of value that you want to think about. Many different ways to look at the world. You can have 2 to 3 times the seller's discretionary income. In other words, effectively, if the owner is making $100,000 a year, you could sell the business for $200,000 or $300,000, and that's a philosophy that some people will use. Sometimes it's 5 times I don't even know what that means. Lisa, maybe you could cover that.
Earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. 5 times EBITDA.
A lot of people think about their business from a sweat equity point of view, how much they put into it. That's a valid way to them think about it. That just probably isn't incredibly valuable from a buyer's point of view. And some functional revenues. And finally, often people who are familiar with one approach simply discard the others. And what we believe, and what our certification model believes, is that we should do multiple methods and enhance the whole process through thinking about the various components, making sure the cash flow works. And I'm right at the edge of my knowledge of this. So Lisa, if you want to add anything here, thank you.
We generally, we're certified through the National Association of Certified Evaluators and Analysts, and the professional standards require you to use, at least consider, each of the 3 methods. So although you may not end up applying one in the end for the final value, you have to consider it. So I think what you said about considering more than one way or one idea is absolutely right. We want to do sometimes you end up discarding 2 of the methods because they really don't make as much sense, or the information wasn't as good. There's a lot of reasons you would do that. And sometimes you end up including maybe 2 of the 3, or maybe all 3, and weighting them so that you get a well-founded value.
Thank you.
Lisa, could you say again what EBITDA means?
That's earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
This slide was from Will Katz, and he wanted me to make sure that you all nod your heads slowly, that you agree and understand this. It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that you just ain't so. I love that statement. I've used it before in other areas, but this is one of the better places for it. So true or false? The business is worth the present value of the cash flow of the business. Second true or false is a business is worth what one person will sell it for and another person will buy it for. Well, that's always true. I quit my job making $40,000 a year. And that was 25 years ago. So the figure of business is worth is $40,000 times 25 years. So it's about $1 million. So we love it when people come to us with those kinds of perspectives. I'm not going to go into a lot of the detail, but this one formula made a lot of sense to me. Value equals the benefit divided by the risk. That's what valuation really comes down to for me. And Lisa, I don't know if you want to go deeper on that, but the concept of the value being about the benefit and the risk is really the equation that I just resonates for me as a finance guy from the past.
Yeah, the formula that you're looking at is one of the income approaches that we use. And quite frankly, you know, in fair market valuations that we do, and most of the situations that we have with our clients, we do use that formula a lot because it really does. I mean, like you just said, it all boils down to return a lot of times and what the person that's buying the business is going to get in return. So looking at what it's making and using a reasonable rate to come up with a value is very common.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm not going to go into the detail of any of these coming slides, but I wanted you to understand some of the components. What we're really trying to understand is things like the risk rate, which is another term for that is capitalization rate. When you start thinking about risk, that's really what the number one underlying problem is. How much risk are you taking either buying or getting rid of the business? Valuation approaches. There's three main ones that we use, but asset approach, income approach, and market approach are probably the most common. And as Lisa just said a minute ago, this really comes down to an art of putting together the various methods to come up with the most reasonable and appropriate value methodology. A seller's discretionary in earnings. Yes, that is a key part, but there's a lot of elements to a discretionary earning that could make all the difference in the world. And we want to help you go through that process and understand it. And that's part of the valuation as well. Cash flow to invested capital. We all understand cash flow and we understand invested capital. So thinking about all the considerations there, another piece. Common benefit streams, cash flow to equity. Great philosophy, easily metriced. I mean, it's easy to put metrics around it, but again, it's just one of multiple methods. And then there's other valuation methods that we use, and that could include the adjusted net assets value, the excess earnings to treasury method model, guidelines for a publicly traded market-driven price, discounted cash flow, and then there's others, just too many to list. I think I put this slide in from Will because, you know, his perspective, I don't know that Will's actually afraid of anything. And if he is, he doesn't show it. But his perspective on it is there's so many variables and values that he has to take into account. He really does pay a lot of attention to, and at least I know you do the same, to all the variables that are in there and making sure that you're really handling the considerations relative to the risk and relative to the unknowns is what makes all the difference for this process. I liked when Will gave me this set of slides. I looked at it and I thought, Oh, that's a really clear picture. You know, if you think about when you buy a business, you know, financially, you know, there's the enterprise and there's the asset value, and then there's what you owe, and there's a net equity there. Well, one way to look at the business value is that equity, but is that enterprise value related to that equity or not? And that's probably, there's way more to the picture. So I kind of like that picture. Value acceleration, I mentioned that earlier. You know, getting the most out of the business is really what that's about. How do you maximize the value? What do you do when you're selling it to a family members? How do you accelerate that value without hurting them? What is it that you're doing when you're got your best business practices in place? Like anything else, what's your house worth? The bottom line is there's a whole lot of considerations that can be adapted and changed and reacted to, and that's key things here. More on value acceleration, and this is what happens when you work with our advisors that do the valuations. They're going to help you with dealing with some of the questions about worthless neighbor that works for you and costs you $100,000 a year, that you could go out and hire them for $100,000 or for $60,000 a year, maybe, whatever. How your cash flow is working and how to free up cash flow to improve the value, making your business more comfortable to live in and work in, assessing the key business values, de-risking the business. That's an interesting one I often run into in doing counseling, and so on. So these are all things that when you talk to us, you'll get a good exposure to and learning from. And these are the three people that you'll be able to work with when you're doing these. Most of our valuation work is nominal fees. As an example, if you need an SBA evaluation for an SBA loan with blue sky in it, then this is a great place to come. A lot of our valuation work goes into just the normal business operations, case by case. So does anybody have any questions? I'm so pleased that this presentation was so complete. I'm surprised nobody even asked one.
Greg?
Yes, sir, Ron.
I'm just curious, what is most typical? I haven't heard that much about ESOPs lately. Is that a very common, or Lisa, is that a very common form of transition? Or what would be more typical? Is it just business to business, or a successor owner, or are they going more toward ESOPs?
My knowledge of ESOPs isn't great, but and then obviously we don't work with a lot of that in the size of companies that we have, but generally if they have fewer than 20 employees, an ESOP it won't work, and it can't be done. So you're looking at, first of all, a minimum employee number of 20 and up.
Okay.
Lisa, would you say what an ESOP is, please?
An employee stock ownership plan.
Thank you.
So that isn't as common for us, but I'm sure in larger businesses that we don't often work with, they're more common. Generally, the ones that I've worked with are either a transition of existing owners in the company, and one owner wants to retire, maybe sell out to the others, or even more often than that, for me, is they're just selling it outright to a financial buyer that's coming in.
An investor?
Yeah, a new person that wants to buy the business outright. And so that's where we get into a lot of SBA loan situations. And you also get into SBA loan situations on other owners buying out a retiring owner.
Thank you.
So the option is there, but the opportunities for the clients we serve most, usually it doesn't happen.
Greg, for us as community owners, what can we do to help as we look around our community, what can we do to increase the likelihood that a business will consult with you or think about these things?
Well, we have a Kansas SBDC website. That's an easy place to go, and you can actually sign up for advising right there. We do about 80% of our work is now done after an initial live session is done over the internet, whether it be live meetings online, whether it be email, but process-wise. So it's easy to work with us now, and we bring all of our skills across the state to where they're needed. And so just people knowing that these services are available, letting them know. People aren't going to share with you that they're thinking about leaving their business. That's just not going to happen. About 7 years ago, we were working with Allied Business Group in the Kansas City area to offer succession planning training. And it was really kind of funny that people from Western Kansas were coming to the sessions in Overland Park, and the people from Eastern Kansas were going out to Hayes. So that's sort of the problem.
Yeah.
One thing I might add there, Greg, is how they can help us would be, as you talk to folks, that are in business out there, succession planning and value enhancement doesn't have to take place and shouldn't, I hope, take place at the very end of an owner's time with their company. You hope that you can talk to people and make them realize that if you build a business as if you're going to sell it, you're never going to go wrong. Because if you make those improvements and enhancements as you own it, you're going to enjoy a better operation and a better business as you own it, and you're going to be better positioned to sell it when you're ready. So it can be a very long-term thing, and it's great if it is.
In my simplistic thinking, I think about having visited homes that I was considering buying, and you look at some homes and they are stuck in the 70s, which is where they bought them, and it would be worth a lot more if they were considering, the value, enjoying the value of the increase in making it a nicer place to live while they were there.
That's a great analogy. Perfect.
One thing I'd like to add too, and Lisa, what your comments made me think about, we use the term succession planning and exit planning interchangeably. But when you're talking to somebody that doesn't want to share that they're thinking about getting out, talking about it as a succession plan is a whole lot easier than talking about it as an exit plan. Mm-hmm. So that's something to consider.
I certainly like the idea. I mean, for myself, I like to think that something that I did will be a legacy to the community, and leaving an empty storefront or a place that doesn't have employee options is not the legacy I'd want to create.
Right. We want more people to think like that, because it's, we have so many small communities and rural communities that are struggling to survive and trying so hard, and you don't want those kinds of things to happen.
Yeah.
You need those businesses to transition to keep the communities vibrant.
Okay, so John Forshey wants to know, is a piece of what you do ever planning for contingencies or for the what ifs?
Absolutely. Lisa, would you mind answering that?
Sure. I mean, that's a big part of it. Just helping someone assess, what can happen, and are you ready if it does? We have assessment tools that we can use to help them with that.
Definitely.
Good.
Okie dokie.
Well, so, Greg, would you share a little bit about the Encountering Innovations work that you're doing with the Department of Defense?
Perfect lead in. If you don't mind, I'm just going to go through this slide, and then I'll get to that near the end.
Okay.
We are reopening 2 centers, one in Salina and one in Dodge City. So I'm excited to have people back and being serviced out of those 2 areas. So, we've been servicing the area, but it's been remotely. So it'll be nice to have a center again in those 2 cities. And then what's also exciting is Kansas City, Kansas. We're going to be opening a outreach center at the Heartland Black Chamber. So we're kind of excited about that. We have a new model that, to answer directly your question, that we call virtual centers, and they are a statewide service that we offer in the areas of tech commercialization, encountering innovation being a part of that, as cybersecurity, and succession and exit planning. The tech commercialization process, I'm so pleased to be able to report, Kansas SBDC will now become a technology certified SBDC program, much like what Missouri and a number of other states have done. A large part of our model is encountering innovation. And what encountering innovation is the opportunity for technologies that actually directly address stated needs by the Department of Defense in support of the warfighters, and to get a kind of a sense of the kinds of things they're looking for. Often it's medical. One of the ones that was most exciting in our first Encountering Innovation event was a company or a process that was developed at KU Med to grow skin at 100 times faster than any other process that anybody's aware of, and that it's grown from the individual that has the injury, so there's no rejection. Another example was drones. Another example was, it's so weird, a splint that automatically sets itself. It's like, you think about it, it's a medical one. Another thing that they're constantly looking for is ways to create and make fuel in the field. So if you've got a process that converts waste, whatever kind of waste, into diesel, as an example, it may cost $200 a gallon to get that diesel there. If they can replace $200 a gallon diesel with $30 a gallon diesel, it's a great deal. So it's a very broad, it's everything that happens to people, and the way and how you support them and where they live. So to give another piece of this equation, SBIR, SDTR grant applications allow for development of innovations on a set schedule, or based on products that 13 federal agencies are looking for. But DOD, they have $95 billion to solve problems. SBIR, SDTR is $2.4 billion. So there's a lot of opportunity here. So we're very excited. We had 57 pitches in October in Wichita, and of the 57, 23 of them are being what's called socialized, and that's considered for commercialization. And that's the DOD wanting to buy them. Sorry.
That is truly unbelievable. 23 out of 57. It's
absolutely phenomenal. And we had clients from every part of our state except Southwest Kansas that had pitched in that group. So this is a statewide opportunity, and we actually opened the doors to surrounding states as well, because we wanted to have a really robust offering for the DOD. So very exciting. What we are doing is a couple of things. One, we are doing a process called a quad chart that creates an understanding of what the product is, the problem it tries to solve, the business model that it's going to be needed, and then the market potential. And that is what's used to evaluate the technology readiness. With the technology readiness, there's a certain level that needs to happen for the DOD to consider it. And then once we've selected the companies that are going to go through that, have met those criteria, then we help them develop their pitch. So that's what we do. Now, I'm also really excited to say that we are being asked to help do this at the other Tech Connect events across the country, which happen in Alabama, New York, Ohio, and Arizona. So this year we'll be doing Alabama and Ohio and probably Arizona. And then next year it'll be all 5.
So in May, we'll be talking more about that Encountering Innovation model with Alan Bagley. And so we should be thinking about, Greg, what's your little mantra about what kind of people or innovation is necessary?
It's kind of everything and anything.
Anything that has to do with people and helps the warfighter, right?
And where they live and the warfighters. Mm-hmm. Solving the problems that they have being deployed. Solving the problems of meeting all their people needs. I mean, people have to live. People have to have a place to live. They have to be taken care of medically. They have to have entertainment. All the things that you do in a normal life happen to the folks in the service.
Wow.
It's amazing.
Okay.
And there's a lot of money to go towards solving these problems.
So if you have somebody in your community that you think, wow, I bet that could be applied in that situation, why think about inviting them to the May 4th conference call. Our next call is today's February 2nd, and the next call is March 2nd. That's how it works in February and March at 9:30, and our subject is economic gardening. And Network Kansas locally produces the economic gardening program, but we have been elevated to get the speakers who are Chris Gibbons, the founder of Economic Gardening, and Paul Bateson, the general manager of Economic Gardening. And economic gardening is for second stage businesses that are ready to take their technology nationwide. Greg, did I interrupt your presentation?
No, that's it.
Okay, good.
I was going to mention the cybersecurity center that.
Yes. And we are going to talk with Greg about cybersecurity later on in the fall, because that's an issue for all of our businesses.
Yep. Actually, it'll be Brian Dennis.
Okay, great. Okay.
Thank you.
I don't see any other chat questions, so thank you everybody for joining us, and hope you'll join us again next month.
Thanks, Nancy. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.